Last night and earlier today, in my teaching, mostly I've been focusing on the importance of deen, of law and justice and boundaries and recognition of gaps and differences in the process of forgiveness and bridge building. But of course, that always has to be in conjunction with chesed, with loving kindness and compassion and that thread of grace. We can't, as I said on Rosh Hashanah, just step off the bridge and stand on the side of love. But we are definitely supposed to be leaning pretty heavily toward it, and especially today, right? Today at Yom Kippur, and as we turn to the middle blessing, which is about the holiness of the day, right? The holiness of Hesed, really, of this day, of rachamim, of compassion. So I wanted to share with you a teaching that just took my breath away. It's a stunning teaching by Shneur Zalman of Liadi, 18th century, the first Rebbe, and actually the founder of Chabad theology. It's a very complicated teaching. I'm gonna way simplify. It's not a time to study the depths of it, but it's actually a teaching of his about the Shema, and primarily the first two paragraphs of the Shema. And as Hasidic texts are wont to do, he just makes a kind of series of associations. There's a way of describing it in Hasidic text that this is bivchinat that. It's in the aspect of, it partakes of, it points to, it's sort of like it, right? That's the feel. So here's what he says. He says that even though we know that the content of the second paragraph of the Shema, which is the Vahaya im Shemoah, if you do all the good things, then God will reward you, and if you don't listen and you do bad things, then the bad things will happen, and right, we know that it seems to be about law, about accountability, about punishment, right? But he says its inner meaning is entirely the light of chesed, of loving kindness. Why? So it has to do with, first of all, different names for God. In the Jewish tradition, there are all these different names of God. We know some of them from the prayer book. We have Adonai, we have Eloheinu, we have El Shaddai, we have Harachamim, we have all these different names. But in the mystical tradition, there are all these other names that no one knows how to pronounce, right? And they are of different lengths. So there's a 42-letter name, and there's a 26-letter name, and there's a 72-letter name. And it turns out that this paragraph, the second paragraph of the Shema, is associated with the 72-letter name of God. Why? Because there are 72 words in the paragraph. And he says, so this paragraph really hints at the 72-letter name of God, and remarkably, the numerical value of the word chesed, all Hebrew words have a numerical value because every letter has a numerical value. And if you add up chet, which is 8, and samech, which is 60, and dalet, which is 4, you get, surprise, 72. So he says, like, and this is a classic, the classic work of mysticism, the Zohar says the 72-letter name of God is chesed, is loving kindness. So this paragraph is associated with that. And then he goes on to say that this is because loving kindness, like the concept, the fact of loving kindness, is divided into 72 aspects, 72 expressions that loving kindness, paths, that loving kindness manifests in the world. And he calls those bridges. And he goes on to say that these 72 bridges of loving kindness are built into the fabric of creation. They're there from Gan Eden, from the original 7 days, going back to the beginning of creation when God creates rain. In the narrative of the creation story, The world is all a mishmash, tohu vavohu, right? Everything in God creates by a process of separation, light and dark, and the dry land from the water, and then God separates the upper waters from the lower waters and creates the possibility of rain. And that enables the water to come to earth in appropriate nourishing measures, halavai, right? Separate drops instead of just this big rush of water in one big flood, right? That's his teaching. Now, if you strip away all the complexities of it and just sit with the image, think about this. There are 72 ways of expressing loving kindness. It's a round number. Built into creation, and those are 72 bridges. And together, they form God's name, right? Loving kindness can be expressed in so many different ways, 72 ways. And however it's expressed in those ways, right, and they're built into the fabric of existence, each one can be a bridge. And together, that's God. That's an enormously beautiful, hopeful text. Just think about what that image means. There are so many ways that we can express love in the world, so many ways, opportunities everywhere. And every single one of them is a bridge. And they don't have to be big, grand gestures, right? Like our society focuses on bigness. And we tend to discount small things. I think it's part of the catastrophe of living in an attention economy and the impact of social media in this way. We measure everything on how many people are impacted. And we don't measure the depth. How deeply is someone or something affected, impacted? This text says raindrops are more effective than flooding. And in fact, there's a Talmudic term, gamla. We say gemilut chasidim, it's the same root, like acts and deeds of loving kindness. Gamla is specifically a small bridge. Not the Vertzano or the GW, a little bridge, like in Bridgehampton, right? That's a gamla. Build small bridges wherever you go. That's what he's saying. So then the question, like he addresses, right? So why then is that in the paragraph, second paragraph? Like, why is the content there not about that, right? It seems to be about law and consequences. And listen to what he says about that. It's the light of loving kindness in the vessel of discipline. For rain to be nourishing, it's everything I've talked about. It has to come in the right measure, at the right time, where and when and how it's needed. This afternoon, we'll read in the Torah reading at Mincha, V'ahavta l'orecha kamocha, right? You love your neighbor as yourself. What it really means is love others the way you want to be loved. But it doesn't mean I like X, so I should do X for others. What it means is you want to be loved as yourself, based on your needs, what's meaningful to you, what you want. And so you should love others that way too. Not what you want, but what they want, right? You get to know them and you love based on their needs, what's meaningful to them and how they want to be loved. The same thing as apology, right? It requires a deep understanding of the other and how they want to be loved. And knowing also what we don't understand. And so he says that's why the light of Hesed has to be contained. in a text about some discipline. Because it has to be particular, it has to be targeted, it has to be careful. So we don't have to build massive bridges spanning miles of gaps. The work of bridging, and I believe this very much about the future of our world, and our country, the work of bridging is person by person, drop by drop. Connecting, loving, forgiving, understanding. Build small bridges. 72 different ways that you can do that.